Hello. It's 7 o'clock. It's Wednesday. It's still quite sunny out. The stream is up. Farmhouse and Erica are in the chat. Is Erica doing homework again? Erica? I'm looking forward to this chapter. I felt bad leaving where we did last time. It was too spooky. Too spooky to leave there, but it was running a little long, so. This is a good one. Give the usual like 10 minutes for people to trickle in. I wonder if the Sharkies have done some reading to catch up, or if what that situation's going to be. To wait for them to show up and then ask them. That would make sense. I need to adjust. Whoop. Too big adjust. The pupper is upset with us because... Oh, hello! Hi, one. Oh no. Is your exclamation broken? It's all ones? I don't know. No, you're just sloppy one. Oh, hang on. Oh. There's a puppy. He's a little bit upset with me right now. He's waiting patiently because it was 29 degrees here today, so we couldn't take him outside during the day because that's just too warm. So we're waiting probably just after the stream is done. We'll go out and about for a bit, but he's definitely been like, anytime we do anything, rain on Friday, yeah, that would be good. It's gonna get super humid, but I can put up with that for the water hitting the plants. When I went up to get dressed for the stream, he got very excited because I guess he thought I was going to put on socks, which is, what happens before we go walking. I'm surprised he hasn't gotten all happy about me saying any of these words. How are we doing? Anyone else show up yet? Where's everybody? I know the Sharkies are going to be here for sure. And I say for sure, and by that I mean they will. Who knows? There's a possibility. So sure. How's your day going today? Up to anything fun? Super busy at work, doing some homework tonight. Oh, and playing Ni no Kuni. Are you having fun with Ni no Kuni? That screenshot you posted was great. I won't repeat the contents here because it's not appropriate for all audiences, but yeah. Yeah, it is pretty relaxing. It's the style of it is just so Ghibli. How's how's Kitty doing? You have a few more minutes. It's currently 7:06, so give it till about. She might be mad. What? I'd be mad. Hasn't been cuddled yet. What is this nonsense? All the pets are angry. I feel like you should probably cuddle the kitty right now. Oh, you're waiting for her. I see. Kind of feels like you're passing the buck there. No, you don't cuddle without permission, but you could, I don't know, summon the kitty or something. Oh, there's the Sharkies. Just finished reading a chapter. All right. So what chapter are you guys on right now? What chapter did you finish? Look who it is. There we go. Look at this guy. Oh, okay. So you're a bit ahead now. Did I light a flame under you to get going? Were you worried about me getting ahead? You gotta be careful. Can't obstruct the view of the pupper. Well, I am glad that you made it. And, yeah, that's right. Needs the screen time. Now that he's graced us with his presence. Yeah, yeah, I'm excited about getting it to it too. That is definitely a highlight for me. How did, uh, how did Mia enjoy that one? Well, it's 10 past, so I think we should probably get started, huh? We were, when we last left off, about halfway through um, Over Hill and Under Hill, Chapter 4. She gives it a thumbs up. Oh, that's high praise. um, so yeah, I think in case anybody doesn't remember, our heroes had left the last homely house behind, and they went up into the mountains, the Misty Mountains, which they need to cross before they can get to the plains and area, the wilds before the Lonely Mountain. And there was a terrible storm when they were up in the mountains, with giants throwing rocks to each other and down into the valley, so that was quite frightening. So our heroes took shelter inside a cave that Feely and Keely found, and they all carefully explored the cave, and it appeared to be safe, but then once they were all asleep, a crack opened up in the back of the cave, and goblins leapt out and captured just about everybody except for Gandalf, who was warned by Bilbo and disappeared with a crack and a flash, and left a couple of roasty goblins behind. So then the goblins were whipping the dwarves and the Hobbit along, down to Goblin Town. Yo-ho, my lad. Ho-ho. So, that's just about where we are right now. Let's pick up from there, right? Let's see. So where we left off, more than one of the dwarves were already yammering and bleating like anything when they stumbled into a big cavern. It was lit by a great red fire in the middle, and by torches along the walls, and it was full of goblins. They all laughed and stamped and clapped their hands when the dwarves, with poor Bilbo at the back and nearest to the whips, came running in, while the goblin drivers whooped and cracked their whips behind. The ponies were already there, huddled in a corner, and there were all the baggages and packages lying broken open and being rummaged by goblins, and smelt by goblins, and fingered by goblins, and quarreled over by goblins. I am afraid that was the last they ever saw of those excellent little ponies, including a jolly sturdy little white fellow that Elrond had lent to Gandalf, since his horse was not suitable for the mountain paths. For goblins eat horses and ponies and donkeys, and other much more dreadful things, and they are always hungry. Just now, however, the prisoners were thinking only of themselves. The goblins chained their hands behind their backs, and linked them all together in a line, and dragged them to the far end of the cavern, with little Bilbo tugging at the end of the row. There in the shadows, on a large, flat stone, sat a tremendous goblin, with a huge head, and armed goblins were standing round him, carrying the axes and the bent swords that they use. Now goblins are cruel, wicked, and bad-hearted. They make no beautiful things, but they make many clever ones. They can tunnel and mine as well as any but the most skilled dwarves, when they take the trouble, though they are usually untidy and dirty. Hammers, axes, swords, daggers, pickaxes, tongs, and also instruments of torture they make very well, or get other people to make to their design, prisoners and slaves that have to work till they die for want of air and light. It is not unlikely that they invented some of the machines that have since troubled the world, especially the ingenious devices for killing large numbers of people at once, for wheels and engines and explosions always delighted them, and also not working with their own hands more than they could help. But in those days, and those wild parts, they had not advanced, as it is called, so far. They did not hate dwarves especially, no more than they hated everybody and everything, and particularly the orderly and prosperous. In some parts, wicked dwarves had even made alliances with them. But they held a special grudge against Thorin's people, because of the war which you have heard mentioned, but which does not come into this tale, and anyway, goblins don't care who they catch, as long as it is done smart and secret, and the prisoners are not able to defend themselves. "Who are these miserable persons?" said the great goblin. "Dwarves, and this," said one of the drivers, pulling at Bilbo's chain so that he fell forward onto his knees. "We found them sheltering in our front porch." "What do you mean by it?" said the great goblin, turning to Thorin. "Up to no good, I'll warrant. Spying on the private business of my people, I guess. Thieves, I shouldn't be surprised to learn. Murderers and friends of elves, not unlikely. Come, what have you got to say?"
"Thorin the dwarf, at your service," he replied. It was merely a polite nothing. "Of all the things which you suspect and imagine, we had no idea at all. We sheltered from a storm in what seemed a convenient cave, and unused. Nothing was further from our thoughts than inconveniencing goblins at any way whatever." That was true enough.
Said the great goblin. "So you say. Might I ask what you are doing up in the mountains at all, and where you are coming from, and where you are going to? In fact, I should like to know all about you. Not that it will do you much good, Thorin Oakenshield. I know too much about your folk already. But let's have the truth, or I will prepare something particularly uncomfortable for you."
"We were on a journey to visit our relatives, our nephews and nieces, and first, second, and third cousins, and the other descendants of our grandfathers, who live on the east side of these truly hospitable mountains," said Thorin, not quite knowing what to say all at once in a moment, when obviously the exact truth would not do at all.
"He is a liar, O truly tremendous one," said one of the drivers. "Several of our people were struck by lightning in the cave when we invited these creatures to come below, and they are as dead as stones. Also, he has not explained this."
He held out the sword which Thorin had worn, the sword which came from the troll's lair. The great goblin gave a truly awful howl of rage when he looked at it, and all his soldiers gnashed their teeth, clashed their shields, and stamped. They knew the sword at once. It had killed hundreds of goblins in its time, when the fair elves of Gondolin hunted them in the hills or did battle before their walls. They had called it Orcrist, goblin cleaver, but the goblins simply called it biter. They hated it, and hated worse anyone that carried it.
"Murderers and elf friends!" the great goblin shouted. "Slash them, beat them, bite them, gnash them. Take them away to dark holes full of snakes, and never let them see the light again."
He was in such a rage that he jumped off his seat and himself rushed at Thorin with his mouth open. Just at that moment, all the lights in the cavern went out, and the great fire went off, poof, into a tower of blue, glowing smoke, right up to the roof, that scattered piercing white sparks all among the goblins. The yells and yammering, croaking, gibbering and jabbering, howls, growls, and curses, shrieking and skriking, that followed were beyond description. Several hundred wild cats and wolves being roasted slowly alive together would not have compared with it. The sparks were burning holes in the goblins, and the smoke that now fell from the roof made the air thick for even their eyes to see through. Soon they were falling over one another and rolling in heaps on the floor, biting and kicking and fighting as if they had all gone mad. Suddenly, a sword flashed in its own light. Bilbo saw it go right through the great goblin as he stood dumbfounded in the middle of his rage. He fell dead, and the goblin soldiers fled before the sword shrieking into the darkness. The sword went back into its sheath. "Follow me, quick," said a voice, fierce and quiet. And before Bilbo understood what had happened, he was trotting along again, as fast as he could trot, at the end of the line down more dark passages, with the yells of the goblin hall growing fainter behind him. A pale light was leading them on. "Quicker, quicker," said the voice. "The torches will soon be relit." "Half a minute," said Dori, who was at the back next to Bilbo, and a decent fellow. He made the hobbit scramble on his shoulders as best he could with his hands tied, and then off they all went at a run, with a clink-clank of chains, and many a stumble, since they had no hands to steady themselves with. Not for a long while did they stop, and by that time they must have been right down in the very mountain's heart. Then Gandalf lit up his wand. Of course it was Gandalf, but just then they were too busy to ask how he got there. He took out his sword again, and again it flashed in the dark by itself. It burnt with a rage that made it gleam if goblins were about. Now it was bright as blue flame for delight in the killing of the great lord of the cave. It made no trouble whatever of cutting through the goblin chains and setting all the prisoners free as quickly as possible. This sword's name was Glamdring the Foehammer, if you remember. The goblins just called it Beater, and hated it worse than Biter if possible. Orchrist, too, had been saved, for Gandalf had brought it along as well, snatching it from one of the terrified guards. Gandalf thought of most things, and though he could not do everything, he could do a great deal for friends in a tight corner. "Are we all here?" said he, handing his sword back to Thorin with a bow. "Let me see. 1, that's Thorin. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Where are Feely and Keely? Here they are, 12, 13. And here's Mr. Baggins, 14. Well, well, it might be worse, and then again it might be a good deal better. No ponies, and no food, and no knowing quite where we are, and hordes of angry goblins just behind. On we go." On they went. Gandalf was quite right. They began to hear goblin noises and horrible cries far behind in the passages they had come through. That sent them on faster than ever, and as poor Bilbo could not possibly go half as fast, for dwarves can roll along at a tremendous pace, I can tell you, when they have to, they took it in turn to carry him on their backs. Still, goblins go faster than dwarves, and these goblins knew the way better. They had made the paths themselves, and were madly angry, so that do what they could, the dwarves heard the cries and growls getting closer and closer. Soon they could hear even the flap of the goblin feet, many, many feet, which seemed only just round the last corner. The blink of red torches could be seen behind them in the tunnel they were following, and they were getting deadly tired. "Why, oh why, did I ever leave my hobbit hole?" said poor Mr. Baggins, bumping up and down on Bomber's back. "Why, oh why, did I ever bring a wretched little hobbit on a treasure hunt?" said poor Bomber, who was fat and staggered along with the sweat dripping down his nose and his heat and terror. At this point Gandalf fell behind, and Thorin with him. They turned a sharp corner. "About turn!" he shouted. "Draw your sword, Thorin!" There was nothing else to be done, and the goblins did not like it. They came scurrying round the corner in full cry, and found Goblin Cleaver and Foe Hammer shining cold and bright right in their astonished eyes. The ones in front dropped their torches and gave one yell before they were killed. The ones behind yelled still more, and leapt back, knocking over those that were running after them. "Bite her and beat her!" they shrieked, and soon they were all in confusion, and most of them were hustling back the way they had come. It was quite a long while before any of them dared to turn that corner. By that time the dwarves had gone on again, a long, long way into the dark tunnels of the goblins' realm. When the goblins discovered that, they put on their torches and they slipped on soft shoes, and they chose out their very quickest runners with the sharpest ears and eyes. These ran forward, as swift as weasels in the dark, and with hardly any more noise than bats. That is why neither Bilbo nor the dwarves, nor even Gandalf, heard them coming, nor did they see them. But they were seen by the goblins that ran silently up behind, for Gandalf was letting his wand give out a faint light to help the dwarves as they went along. Quite suddenly Dori, now at the back again carrying Bilbo, was grabbed from behind in the dark. He shouted and fell, and the hobbit rolled off his shoulders into the blackness, bumped his head on hard rock, and remembered nothing more. Well, that was a bit scary, and I'm having trouble saying the word Hobbit tonight, apparently, which is not great considering the book that we're reading. Hoblet and Robbit. Alright, what are people saying? That was the end of chapter 4, by the way. Goblin killing swords. Interesting about the soft shoes. Yeah, the goblins are mean and nasty and maybe crude, but still clever, it seems like. The book is called The Hobbit now. Interesting that they made an effort to be stealthy. Well, I mean, that's how this all started, was the goblins making an effort to be stealthy. They liked it best when they could catch their foes unaware. Alright, well, that's only been 15 minutes so far, so I do think we should go at least a ways into Chapter 5. Let's see. This is definitely an exciting one. I'm not exactly certain how long it is. I imagine it's probably a little bit longer. So it goes from 91 to 117, well, 116. So we may not make it all the way through this one, but I'll pick about a halfway point, and we'll get to there and see how we're doing. Pick about there for now. Dwarves needing light in the dark. Yeah, it does seem to me like, well, these dwarves in particular have probably not all spent that much time living underground. So I imagine that the dwarves that live their lives in caves and under mountains and such probably are much more accustomed to the dark and dark places. But these ones, maybe not so much, because they've all been chased out of their mountain and have been trying to set up an opportunity to go take it back this whole time. So the next chapter is called Riddles in the Dark. And there's quite a spooky image at the beginning of it. Give it a moment. There it is. That looks like it's focused up all right. Wonder who that could be. Very spooky, yeah, I think so. Well, let's get into it, shall we? Puppy is still just sitting there, listening as well. Alright. So Bilbo had just bumped his head on a rock and passed out. Yes. One more drink of water for this one. When Bilbo opened his eyes, he wondered if he had, for it was just as dark as with them shut. No one was anywhere near him. Just imagine his fright. He could hear nothing, see nothing, and he could feel nothing except the stone of the floor. Very slowly he got up and groped about on all fours, till he touched the wall of the tunnel, but neither up nor down it could he find anything. Nothing at all. No sign of goblins, no sign of dwarves. His head was swimming, and he was far from certain even of the direction they had been going in when he had his fall. He guessed as well as he could, and crawled along for a good way, till suddenly his hand met what felt like a tiny ring of cold metal lying on the floor of the tunnel. It was a turning point in his career, but he did not know it. He put the ring in his pocket almost without thinking. Certainly it did not seem of any particular use at the moment. He did not go much further, but sat down on the cold floor and gave himself up to complete miserableness for a long while. He thought of himself frying bacon and eggs in his own kitchen at home, for he could feel inside that it was high time for some meal or other, but that only made him feel miserabler. He could not think what to do, nor could he think what had happened, or why he had been left behind, or why, if he had been left behind, the goblins had not caught him, or even why his head was so sore. The truth was, he had been lying quiet, out of sight and out of mind, in a very dark corner for a long while. After some time he felt for his pipe. It was not broken, and that was something. Then he felt for his pouch, and there was some tobacco in it, and that was something more. Then he felt for matches, and he could not find any at all, and that shattered his hopes completely. Just as well for him. as agreed when he came to his senses. As he agreed when he came to his senses. Goodness knows what the striking of matches and the smell of tobacco would have brought on him out of dark holes in that horrible place. Still, at the moment he felt very crushed. But in slapping all his pockets and feeling all round himself for matches, his hand came on the hilt of his little sword, the little dagger that he got from the trolls, and that he had quite forgotten. Nor, fortunately, had the goblins noticed it, as he wore it inside his breeches. Now he drew it out. It shone pale and dim before his eyes. So it is an elvish blade too, he thought, and goblins are not very near, and yet not far enough. But somehow he was comforted. It was rather splendid to be wearing a blade made in Gondolin for the goblin wars of which so many songs had been sung. And also he had noticed that such weapons made a great impression on goblins that came upon them suddenly. Go back? He thought. No good at all. Go sideways? Impossible. Go forward? Only thing to do. On we go! So up he got, and trotted along with his little sword held in front of him, and one hand feeling the wall, and his heart all of a patter and a pitter. Now certainly Bilbo was in what is called a tight place. But you must remember, it was not quite so tight for him as it would have been for me or for you. Hobbits are not quite like ordinary people, and after all, if their holes are nice cheery places and properly aired, quite different from the tunnels of the goblins, still they are more used to tunneling than we are, and they do not easily lose their sense of direction underground, not when their heads have recovered from being bumped. And they can move very quietly and hide easily, and recover wonderfully from falls and bruises, and they have a fund of wisdom and wise sayings that men have mostly never heard or have forgotten long ago. I should not have liked to have been in Mr. Baggin's place, all the same. The tunnels seemed to have no end. All he knew was that it was still going down pretty steadily, and keeping in the same direction in spite of a twist and a turn or two. There were passages leading off to the side every now and then, as he knew by the glimmer of his sword, or could feel with his hand on the wall. Of these he took no notice, except to hurry past for fear of goblins or half-imagined dark things coming out of them. On and on he went, and down, and still he heard no sound of anything except the occasional whir of a bat by his ears, which startled him at first, till it became too frequent to bother about. I do not know how long he kept on like this, hating to go on, not daring to stop, on, until he was tireder than tired. It seemed like all the way to tomorrow, and over it to the days beyond. Suddenly, without any warning, he trotted splash into water. Ugh! It was icy cold. That pulled him up, sharp and short. He did not know whether it was just a pool in the path, or the edge of an underground stream that crossed the passage, or the brink of a deep, dark, subterranean lake. The sword was hardly shining at all. He stopped, and he could hear, when he listened hard, drops dripping from an unseen roof into the water below, but there seemed no other sort of sound. So it is a pool or a lake, and not an underground river, he thought. Still, he did not dare to wade out into the darkness. He could not swim, and he thought too of nasty, slimy things with big, bulging, blind eyes wriggling in the water. There are strange things living in the pools and lakes in the hearts of mountains. Fish whose fathers swam in goodness only knows how many years ago, and never swam out again, while their eyes grew bigger and bigger and bigger from trying to see in the blackness. Also, there are other things more slimy than fish. Even in the tunnels and caves the goblins have made for themselves, there are other things living unbeknown to them that have sneaked in from outside to lie up in the dark. Some of these caves, too, go back in their beginnings to ages before the goblins, who only widened them and joined them up with passages, and the original owners are still there, in odd corners, slinking and nosing about. Deep down here by the dark water lived old Gollum, a small, slimy creature. I don't know where he came from, nor who or what he was. He was Gollum, as dark as darkness, except for two big, round, pale eyes in his thin face. He had a little boat, and he rowed about quite quietly on the lake, for lake it was, wide and deep and deadly cold. He paddled it with large feet dangling over the side, but never a ripple did he make, not he. He was looking out of his pale, lamp-like eyes for blind fish, which he grabbed with his long fingers as quick as thinking. He liked meat, too. Goblin he thought good, when he could get it, but he took care they never found him out. He just throttled them from behind if they ever came down alone anywhere near the edge of the water while he was prowling about. They very seldom did, for they had a feeling that something unpleasant was lurking down there, down at the very roots of the mountain. They had come on the lake when they were tunneling down long ago, and they found they could go no further, so their road ended in that direction, and there was no reason to go that way, unless the great goblin sent them. Sometimes he took a fancy for fish from the lake, and sometimes neither goblin nor fish came back. Actually, Gollum lived on a slimy island of rock in the middle of the lake. He was watching Bilbo now, from the distance with his pale eyes like telescopes. Bilbo could not see him, but he was wondering a lot about Bilbo, for he could see that he was no goblin at all. Gollum got into his boat and shot off from the island, while Bilbo was sitting on the brink altogether flummoxed and at the end of his way and his wits. Suddenly up came Gollum and whispered and hissed. Now I've got to figure out what Gollum sounds like. Miserabler, yeah, I had trouble with that one. Oof, that pipe. Ouch, but no matches. Reminds me of our last camping trip. Yeah, maybe. Guess he just lives near a river for a water source. Oh. There seemed to be a little reference here and there in this chapter about Gollum's previous life. I don't know, mention of Smeagol. Yeah, it seems like maybe he had an idea about precisely who Gollum was. Alright. Suddenly, up came Gollum and whispered and hissed. "Bless us and splash us, my precious. I guess it's a choice feast. At least a tasty morsel it'd make us, Gollum." And when he said Gollum, he made a horrible swallowing noise in his throat. That is how he got his name, though he always called himself my precious. The Hobbit jumped nearly out of his skin when the hiss came in his ears, and he suddenly saw the pale eyes sticking out at him. "Who are you?" he said, thrusting his dagger in front of him. "What is he, my precious?" whispered Gollum, who always spoke to himself, through never having anyone else to speak to. This is what he had come to find out, for he was not really very hungry at the moment, only curious. Otherwise, he would have grabbed first and whispered afterwards. "I am Mr. Bilbo Baggins. I have lost the dwarves, and I have lost the wizard, and I don't know where I am, and I don't want to know, if only I can get away." "What's he got in his hands?" said Gollum, looking at the sword, which he did not quite like. "A sword, a blade which came out of Gondolin," said Gollum, and became quite polite. "P'raps ye sits here and chats with it a bitsy, my precious. It likes riddles, p'raps it does it?" He was anxious to appear friendly, at any rate for the moment, and until he found out more about the sword and the Hobbit, whether he was quite alone really, whether he was good to eat, and whether Gollum was really hungry. Riddles were all he could think of. Asking them, and sometimes guessing them, had been the only game he had ever played with other funny creatures sitting in their holes in the long, long ago, before he lost all his friends and was driven away alone and crept down, down, into the dark under the mountains. Very well, said Bilbo, who was anxious to agree, until he found out more about the creature, whether he was quite alone, whether he was fierce or hungry, and whether he was a friend of the goblins. You ask first, he said, because he had not had time to think of a riddle. So Gollum hissed. What has roots as nobody sees, is taller than trees, up, up it goes, and yet never grows. Easy, said Bilbo. Mountain, I suppose. Does it guess easy? It must have a competition with us, my precious. If Precious asks, and it doesn't answer, then we does what it wants, eh? We shows it the ways out, yes. All right, said Bilbo, not daring to disagree, and nearly bursting his brain to think of riddles that could save him from being eaten. 30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still. What do you guys think that is? 30 white horses on a red hill. Rude, Bilbo. Anyone got any guesses about the white horses? That was all he could think of to ask. The idea of eating was rather on his mind. It was rather an old one, too, and Gollum knew the answer as well as you do. That's right, you should know this one. Chestnuts, chestnuts, he hissed. Teeth, teeth, my precious, but we has only 6. Then he asked his second. Voiceless it cries, wingless flutters, toothless bites, mouthless mutters. Half a moment, cried Bilbo, who was still thinking uncomfortably about eating. What do you guys think this one is? Fortunately, he had once heard something rather like this before, and getting his wits back, he thought of the answer. Wind! Wind, of course, he said, and he was so pleased that he made up one on the spot. This'll puzzle the nasty little underground creature, he thought. An eye in a blue face saw an eye in a green face. That eye is like to this eye, said the first eye, but in low place, not in high place. It's an interesting one, and Bilbo made it up, apparently. I'll give you guys a second or two to think about what it might be. Eyes in different places. Said Gollum. He had been underground a long, long time, and was forgetting this sort of thing. But just as Bilbo was beginning to hope that the wretch would not be able to answer, Gollum brought up memories of ages and ages and ages before, when he lived with his grandmother in a hole in a bank by a river. My precious, he said. Sun on the daisies, it means it does. But these ordinary, above-ground, everyday sorts of riddles were tiring for him. Also, they reminded him of days when he had been less lonely and sneaky and nasty, and that put him out of temper. What is more, they made him hungry, so this time he tried something a bit more difficult and more unpleasant. It cannot be seen, cannot be felt, cannot be heard, cannot be smelt. It lies behind stars and under hills, and empty holes it fills. It comes first and follows after, ends life kills laughter.
Well, that is a more unpleasant riddle, isn't it? That's quite the description from the Sharkies there.
All right. What could it be? Unfortunately for Gollum, Bilbo had heard that sort of thing before, and the answer was all round him anyway. Dark, he said, without even scratching his head or putting on his thinking cap. I like this next one. A box without hinges, key, or lid, yet golden treasure inside is hid. I feel like this one's a classic. He asked to gain time until he could think of a really hard one. This, he thought, a dreadfully easy chestnut, though he had not asked it in the usual words, but it proved a nasty poser for Gollum. He hissed to himself, and still he did not answer. He whispered and spluttered. After some while, Bilbo became impatient. Well, what is it? He said. The answer's not a kettle boiling over, as you seem to think from the noise you are making. Give us a chance. Let it give us a chance, my precious. Well, said Bilbo, after giving him a long chance, what about your guess? But suddenly, Gollum remembered thieving from nests long ago, and sitting under the river bank, teaching his grandmother to suck. Eggses, he hissed. Eggses it is. Then he asked, alive without breath, as cold as death, never thirsty, ever drinking, all in mail, never clinking. I definitely know this one. What about you guys? He also, in turn, thought this was a dreadfully easy one, because he was always thinking of the answer. But he could not remember anything better at the moment, he was so flustered by the egg question. All the same, it was a poser for poor Bilbo, who had never had anything to do with the water if he could help it. I imagine you know the answer, of course, or can guess it easy as winking, since you are sitting comfortably at home and have not the danger of being eaten to disturb your thinking. Bilbo sat and cleared his throat once or twice, but no answer came. After a while, Gollum began to hiss with pleasure to himself. Is it nice, my precious? Is it juicy? Is it scrumptiously crunchable? He began to peer at Bilbo out of the darkness. Half a moment, said the Hobbit, shivering. Just having the worst time with that word. I gave you a good long chance just now. It must make haste, haste, said Gollum, beginning to climb out of his boat onto the shore to get at Bilbo. But when he put his long webby foot in the water, a fish jumped out in fright and fell on Bilbo's toes. Ugh, he said, it is cold and clammy. And so he guessed. Fish, fish, he cried, it is fish. Gollum was dreadfully disappointed, but Bilbo asked another riddle as quick as ever he could, so that Gollum had to get back into his boat and think. No legs lay on one leg. 2 legs sat near on 3 legs. 4 legs got some. It was not really the right time for this riddle, but Bilbo was in a hurry. Gollum might have had some trouble guessing it if he had asked it at another time. As it was, talking of fish, no legs was not so very difficult, and after that the rest was easy. Well, you've got a hint already. All right. Fish on a little table. Man at table sitting on a stool. The cat has the bones. That, of course, is the answer, and Gollum soon gave it. Then he thought the time had come to ask something hard and horrible. This is what he said. This thing all things devours. Birds, beasts, trees, flowers. Gnaws iron, bites steel. Grinds hard stones to meal. Slays king, ruins town, and beats high mountains down. That is a nasty one. Poor Bilbo sat in the dark, thinking of all the horrible names of all the giants and ogres he had ever heard told of in tales, but not one of them had done all these things. He had a feeling that the answer was quite different, and that he ought to know it, but he could not think of it. He began to get frightened, and that is bad for thinking. Gollum began to get out of his boat. He flapped into the water and paddled to the bank. Bilbo could see his eyes coming towards him. His tongue seemed to stick in his mouth, and he wanted to shout out, "Give me more time! Give me time!" But all that came out with a sudden squeal was, "Time! Time!" Bilbo was saved by pure luck, for that, of course, was the answer. Gollum was disappointed once more, and now he was getting angry, and also tired of the game. It had made him very hungry indeed. This time he did not go back to the boat. He sat down in the dark by Bilbo. That made the hobbit most dreadfully uncomfortable, and scattered his wits. "It's got to ask us a question, my precious. Yes, yes, yes. Just one more question to guess. Yes, yes," said Gollum. But Bilbo simply could not think of any question with that nasty, cold, wet thing sitting next to him, and pawing and poking him. He scratched himself, he pinched himself. Still, he could not think of anything. Ask us, said Gollum. Bilbo pinched himself and slapped himself. He gripped on his little sword. He even felt in his pocket with his other hand. There he found the ring he had picked up in the passage and forgotten about. "What have I got in my pocket?" he said aloud. He was talking to himself, but Gollum thought it was a riddle, and he was frightfully upset. "Not fair! Not fair!" he hissed. "It isn't fair, my precious, is it, to ask us what it's got in its nasty little pocketses?" Bilbo, seeing what had happened, and having nothing better to ask, stuck to his question. "What have I got in my pocket?" he said louder. "Sssss," hissed Gollum. "It must give us 3 guesses, my precious. 3 guesses." "Very well, guess away," said Bilbo. "Handses," said Gollum. "Wrong," said Bilbo, who had luckily just taken his hand out again. "Guess again." Said Gollum, more upset than ever. He thought of all the things he kept in his own pockets. Fish bones, goblins' teeth, wet shells, a bit of bat wing, a sharp stone to sharpen his fangs on, and other nasty things. He tried to think what other people kept in their pockets. "Knife," he said at last. "Wrong," said Bilbo, who had lost his some time ago. "Last guess." Now Gollum was in a much worse state than when Bilbo had asked him the egg question. He hissed and spluttered and rocked himself backwards and forwards, and slapped his feet on the floor, and wriggled and squirmed, but still he did not dare to waste his last guess. "Come on," said Bilbo. "I am waiting." He tried to sound bold and cheerful, but he did not feel at all sure how the game was going to end, whether Gollum guessed right or not. "Time's up," he said. "String or nothing!" shrieked Gollum, which was not quite fair, working in two guesses at once. "Both wrong!" cried Bilbo, very much relieved, and he jumped at once to his feet and put his back to the nearest wall and held out his little sword. He knew, of course, that the riddle game was sacred and of immense antiquity, and even wicked creatures were afraid to cheat when they played at it. But he felt he could not trust this slimy thing to keep any promise at a pinch. Any excuse would do for him to slide out of it. And, after all, that last question had not been a genuine riddle according to the ancient laws. But, at any rate, Gollum did not at once attack him. He could see the sword in Bilbo's hand. He sat still, shivering and whispering. At last, Bilbo could wait no longer. "Well," he said, "what about your promise? I want to go. You must show me the way."
"Did we say so, precious? Show the nasty little Baggins the way out? Yes, yes. But what has it got in its pocketses, eh? Not string, precious, but not nothing. Oh no, Gollum!"
"Never you mind," said Bilbo. "A promise is a promise."
"Cross it is, impatient, precious," hissed Gollum. "But it must wait. Yes, it must. We can't go up the tunnels so hasty. We must go and get some things first. Yes, things to help us."
"Well, hurry up," said Bilbo, relieved to think of Gollum going away. He thought he was just making an excuse, and did not mean to come back. What was Gollum talking about? What useful thing could he keep out on the dark lake? But he was wrong. Gollum did mean to come back. He was angry now and hungry, and he was a miserable, wicked creature, and already he had a plan. Not far away was his island, of which Bilbo knew nothing, and there, in his hiding place, he kept a few wretched oddments, and one very beautiful thing. Very beautiful, very wonderful. He had a ring, a golden ring, a precious ring.
"My birthday present,"
he whispered to himself, as he had often done in the endless dark days.
"That's what we wants now. Yes, we wants it."
He wanted it because it was a ring of power, and if you slipped that ring on your finger, you were invisible. Only in the full sunlight could you be seen, and then only by your shadow, and that would be shaky and faint.
"My birthday present. It came to me on my birthday, my precious."
So he had always said to himself, but who knows how Gollum came by that present, ages ago in the old days, when such rings were still at large in the world. Perhaps even the master who ruled them all could not have said. Gollum used to wear it at first, till it tired him, and then he kept it in a pouch next to his skin, till it galled him, and now usually he hid it in a hole in the rock on his island, and was always going back to look at it. And still sometimes he put it on, when he could not bear to be parted from it any longer, or when he was very, very hungry and tired of fish. Then he would creep along dark passages looking for stray goblins. He might even venture into places where the torches were lit and made his eyes blink and smart, for he would be safe. Oh yes, quite safe. No one would see him, no one would notice him, till he had his fingers on their throat. Only a few hours ago he had worn it, and caught a small goblin imp. How it squeaked! He still had a bone or two left to gnaw, but he wanted something softer.
Quite safe, yes, he whispered to himself. It won't see us, will it, my precious? No, it won't see us, and its nasty little sword will be useless. Yes, quite.
That is what was in his wicked little mind, as he slipped suddenly from Bilbo's side and flapped back to his boat and went off into the dark. Bilbo thought he had heard the last of him. Still, he waited a while, for he had no idea how to find his way out alone. Suddenly, he heard a screech. It sent a shiver down his back. Gollum was cursing and wailing away in the gloom, not very off by the sound of it. He was on his island, scrabbling here and there, searching and seeking in vain.
Where is it? Where is it?
Bilbo heard him crying.
Lost! It is, my precious! Lost! Lost! Curse us and crush us! My precious is lost!
What's the matter? Bilbo called. What have you lost?
It mustn't ask us!
Shrieked Gollum.
Not its business! No, Gollum! It's lost! Gollum! Gollum! Gollum!
Well, so am I, cried Bilbo, and I want to get unlost, and I won the game, and you promised. So come along, come and let me out, and then go on without your looking. Utterly miserable as Gollum sounded, Bilbo could not find much pity in his heart, and he had a feeling that anything Gollum wanted so much could hardly be something good. Come along, he shouted.
No, not yet, precious, Gollum answered. We must search for it. It's lost. Gollum!
But you never guessed my last question, and you promised, said Bilbo.
Never guessed,
said Gollum. Then suddenly out of the gloom came a sharp hiss.
What has it got in its pocketses? Tell us that. It must tell first.
As far as Bilbo knew, there was no particular reason why he should not tell. Gollum's mind had jumped to a guess quicker than his, for Gollum had brooded for ages on this one thing, and he was always afraid of its being stolen. But Bilbo was annoyed at the delay. After all, he had won the game pretty fairly, at a horrible risk. Answers were to be guessed, not given, he said.
But it wasn't a fair question, said Gollum. Not a riddle, precious, no.
Oh, well, if it's a matter of ordinary questions, Bilbo replied, then I asked one first. What have you lost? Tell me that.
What has it got in its pocketses?
The sound came hissing louder and sharper, and as he looked towards it, to his alarm Bilbo now saw 2 small points of light peering at him. As suspicion grew in Gollum's mind, the light of his eyes burnt with a pale flame. What have you lost? Bilbo persisted. But now the light in Gollum's eyes had become a green fire, and it was coming swiftly nearer. Gollum was in his boat again, paddling wildly back to the dark shore, and such a rage of loss and suspicion was in his heart that no sword had any more terror for him. I think that's probably a good place to stop. What do you guys think? We've been just about an hour now. I had maybe a little bit of Andy Serkis coming through there when Gollum was in a rage. What is everyone saying? Flustered by the egg question. Sounds like a good band name. Yeah, I would listen to Flustered by the Egg Question. The 1977 one echoes in your head whenever you hear it. Really went dramatic with the last riddle. Exams with your dog. Or kids. This suggests that Gollum has pockets. Oh, long work day for Christine. Erica would like Gollum's pants. I don't know about that one. I don't know if I want Gollum's pants. I think probably not. I don't think I do. Pockets that can fit rocks and shells and maybe a knife. Nice. No, it said in this that Gollum referred to himself as my precious. It mentioned that earlier in this chapter, that people called him Gollum, but he only ever called himself my precious. I think maybe he refers to both, though. It's possible. Flippin' heck, precious. Always thought his identity was so wrapped up in the ring, as he had been with it for so long, no one else to talk to, the ring had become part of one aspect of his personality. That's a good take. I could see that. And it does kind of seem like he refers to both himself and the ring. So maybe that's part of why he's so upset, is they're almost one and the same. Could probably write a book just on Gollum psychology. Some Serkis energy. Yeah, it slipped out. I don't know. When you're getting angry and screaming with that kind of lisp, I guess it kind of just slinks into that territory, and it's hard to. I mean, it's such an iconic performance. The juxtaposition of Gollum in the dark with all the water and fish and boat stuff, and Bilbo who tries not to be near water and lives in a bright, clean hole. It's less nasally, yeah. That's an interesting thing. So yeah, those are a couple of chapters, huh? That's there was some spooky stuff happening there. And I don't think the spookiness is going to let up anytime soon. I do really like the riddles, and it's interesting how they talk about the riddle game, the reverence that apparently everyone in the world has for riddles. You don't cheat at riddles. You don't go back on your word when riddles are involved, apparently. Even if you're a horrible little creature that lives in the dark in the heart of a mountain. I wonder how that came to be exactly. I wonder if this was your first exposure to the riddle game. I don't think that I play the riddle game very often. I don't keep a lot of riddles memorized, and I certainly don't think I'd be very good at making up my own, especially if somebody was threatening to eat me if I failed at it. But this was definitely my first exposure to the riddle game. No surprise there. Do any of you have any good riddles? It's amusing when a wicked character is compelled to follow rules. Yeah, that's definitely an interesting idea. Lawful evil, right? It's a little like the Billy Goat's gruff thing. Yeah, there's definitely similarities there. Hey, language. Erica, language. What's furry and knocks things off of shelves when she's hungry? Riddles are honored like that in traditional fae stories. Yeah, that's definitely true. I think of fae and fairy folk is you have to be careful with your language around them. You have to be careful what you agree to and the phrasing of things. You have to follow the rules around them, and generally speaking, you can count on them to maybe follow the letter of the rule, if not the spirit of them. Which is part of why you have to be very careful about wandering alone in forests and into fairy rings and things like that. Not the only reason, because who knows if time's going to work differently if you wander through a fairy ring. You might come back with all of your friends being all grown up and leaving you behind.
You just took out Elmo and tried to do an Elmo Serkis voice. I'm not even gonna go near that. That's too scary for me. These past couple chapters with goblins and golems were scary enough, but that sounds even scarier. Oh, did the pupper sneak away at some point? Binnabon bean. Binnakegabon bean. I can hear him clicking along. He got his nails trimmed recently, so he's not quite as clicky as he used to be. Come here, puppy. Minnabic. Minnabic. Come here. What? Where are you going? Just a second. I need to entice him here so I can introduce him properly. Oh, you heard that. Let's come over here. Okay, you in? You in? Wait a minute. Why are you spooked? You want another? Come here. Come here. Come get it. Thinks I'm up to something, apparently. Bin. Oh. Well, next time, I guess. No. Farmos, that's a terrible request. I don't want a picture of Gollum Elmo. That sounds awful. Mia agrees. Oh no! Oh no! Alright, well. Even if maybe I'm not going to like it, I will still show it if you guys want to send it over. I'll still show it next time, or whenever. But I think that's enough for tonight. I'm getting a bit tired. I need to have a drink and get something to eat. And he actually didn't do art for this week. Oh, but you've got something on the go. Oh, that's intriguing. Elmo wants to know what's in its pocketses. Pocketses. I am, color me intrigued. I'm curious of what you've got on the go. But that's going to be enough for me. Like I said, I got to get something to eat. And, still got some stuff to do this evening now that it's cooled down a little bit. We got to take Binnabic for a walk out and about. Yeah. Binnabic is named after a character from another book, another series of books. Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams. I don't think we'll probably get to that series on the stream. That's a much longer series of books, and I don't know if we'd ever reach the end of them if we started them, but they are it is a series that I quite enjoy. So if you're looking for a fantasy novel, I've actually got one of them over here. This is one of the last ones. Quite like the cover art. And the back is also, speaking of fae folk, here's an example of some fae folk which you have to be very careful around. Let's see. There we go. Yeah, not necessarily a child-friendly series of books, but a very entertaining series that I very much enjoy. Obviously, you know, the pupper is named after a character from them. Oh, well, thank you, kids. I love you guys too, and I'm very happy that you have been coming to join us in reading The Hobbit here. That's very nice of you. Thank you. Elliot shouted it, as is his custom. It's good to have traditions. But don't wake up Mom, okay? Alright. Well, have a good night. Love you guys too. And I hope everybody sleeps well tonight. And, what's today? Wednesday? So I'll see you all Friday night. And we'll get on with, getting out of the dark and on to other spooky things. Good night, everybody.